Communication. Communication, one of the 4 elements of directing, is essence of management. To achieve organizational objectives, a manager should know how to communicate effectively with his subordinates and create understanding in them. The word communication has been derived from the Latin word communis, which means common, which consequently implies common understanding. Thus, we can define communication as the process of exchanging information between 2 or more persons to reach common understanding. Every living being, whether an animal or a human on this earth, communicates with other living beings in many ways. The type of communication that humans use may be verbal or non-verbal. The use of words, either written or spoken, to convey a message is verbal communication. On the other hand, communication through actions and behaviors is non-verbal communication. The majority of our feelings and intentions are sent through non-verbal communication. Spoken language is only 7 to 35% of communication. The types of verbal communication fall into 2 broad categories: oral communication and written communication. If we use spoken words to convey a message, then it is termed as oral communication. Oral communication can either be face-to-face communication or a conversation over phone or on the voice chat over internet. On the other hand, if we use written words to communicate, then the same is termed as written communication. Written communication can be in the form of advertisements, brochures, contracts, emails, letters, memos, press releases, proposals, and websites. Non-verbal communication includes the overall body language of the person who is speaking, facial expressions, gestures, paralanguage, body language, distance, eye contact, touch, and appearance are the different types of non-verbal communication. Elements of communication process. Let's proceed to the elements of communication process with an example. Miss Mary Clark is working with PQL Private Limited as the head of marketing department. She sends an email to her subordinates explaining the work delegated to them on a new project. Employees who could understand the mail in totality started working as required, but a few of them had some doubts and needed more explanation. They asked her to arrange a meeting to clarify their doubts. The entire process contains the following elements. Sender, like Miss Clark, is the one who initiates the communication process. Encoding is the formulation of messages in the communicator's mind. The communicator not only translates his purpose into a message, but also decides on the medium to communicate his planned message. Here, Miss Clark selects writing as a medium to communicate her message. Media channel is the part through which a message is carried from the communicator to the receiver. Miss Clark selected Internet as the channel of communication. The receiver is the recipient of the message. In our example, Miss Clark's subordinates are the recipients of the message. Decoding is the interpretation of the message by the receiver. Feedback is the response or acknowledgement of receiver to the communicator's message. Importance of communication. A manager's ability to function and his success depends upon how well he can communicate. Ineffective communication may lead to misunderstandings, poor performance, low staff morale, etc. Therefore, it is essential to say the right things at the right time and at the right place when dealing with superiors, subordinates, and external agencies such as bankers, suppliers, union, and government. An effective communication is very important for an organization, as communication provides coordination among departments, activities, and persons in the organization. It also facilitates smooth working in an enterprise. Communication plays a crucial role in altering individuals' attitudes. The attitude of a well-informed individual will be better than that of a less informed individual. A manager requires complete information to take any meaningful decision. Communication provides the needed information to the manager. Communication increases managerial efficiency. A manager requires an effective communication to convey the goals and objectives, issue instructions, allocate jobs and responsibilities, and look after the performance of the subordinates. There should be two-way communication between the management and workers to promote cooperation and mutual understanding among them. Communication is the basis of leadership. A manager can influence his subordinates through an effective communication. A manager needs to communicate effectively to motivate, influence, and satisfy his subordinates. This helps to boost morale of employees as well as managers. Formal and informal communication. Now, we will understand different ways of communication in an organization. There are basically two ways of communication: formal communication and informal communication. Formal communication is the easiest way to communicate in an organization, as it flows through official channels designed in the organization chart. It is marked with yellow lines on the chart. Formal communication may be further classified as vertical communication and horizontal communication. Vertical communication flows upwards or downwards through formal channels. If the communication flows from superior to subordinate, then it is downward communication. For example, sending notice to employees to attend a meeting, ordering subordinates to complete an assigned work, passing on guidelines framed by top management to the subordinates, etc. It is explained by arrow A in the organization chart. If the communication flows from subordinate to superior, then it is upward communication. For example, application for grant of leave, submission of progress report, request for grants, etc. It is explained by arrow B in the organization chart. Horizontal or lateral communication occurs between employees on the same level in an organization. For example, A production manager may contact marketing manager to discuss about schedule of product delivery, product design, quality, etc. It is explained by arrow C in the organization chart. There is a pattern through which communication flows within an organization. This pattern is indicated through communication networks. Some of the popular communication networks that may operate in formal organizations are chain network, wheel or star network, circular network, inverted V network, free flow or all-channel network. Chain network exists between a supervisor and his subordinates. Information flows vertically in this network. In wheel or star network, information flows from one superior to all subordinates. The subordinates do not communicate with each other. In circular network, the information moves in a circle. Members communicate with others if they share something in common, such as experiences, beliefs, expertise, office location, etc. Inverted V network allows a subordinate to communicate with his immediate superior as well as his superior superior. In a free flow or all-channel network, each team member can communicate with every other team member. Information flows in all directions in this network. We learnt earlier that a manager should know about the informal groups within the organization for effective directing. Informal groups communicate in smoother and less cumbersome manner than those of the formal organization. People communicate with each other without following the formal lines of communication. This way of communication is known as informal communication. Workers from different teams chit-chatting in a canteen about the behavior of the superior is an example of informal communication. Informal communication is generally referred to as the grapevine, as it spreads throughout the organization with its branches going out in all directions, irrespective of the levels of authority. The grapevine or informal communication spreads rapidly and sometimes gets distorted. Grapevine communication may follow different types of network. Some of these networks are chain or single-strand network, which allows each person to communicate to the other in sequence. Gossip network, which permits each person to communicate with all on non-selective basis. Probability network. In this network, people communicate randomly with other individuals. Cluster network that allows an individual to communicate with only those whom he trusts. Barriers to communication. A manager may face several problems if the message sent by him is not interpreted correctly by his subordinates. There may be several barriers which interrupt the flow of communication from sender to receiver, thus making communication ineffective. The barriers to communication in the organizations can be broadly grouped as semantic barriers, psychological barriers, organizational barriers, personal barriers. Semantic barriers. Semantics is related to meanings of words or sentences. Every word has a direct meaning, called the denotative meaning, and words also acquire implied meanings, called connotative meanings. Miscommunication may occur if encoder and decoder do not share the same connotative meaning for a word. If encoder uses wrong words and symbols. If decoder translates the message wrongly. If decoder does not know the actual meaning of technical jargons, and if there is no match between what is said and what is expressed in body movements. Emotional and psychological barriers. The state of mind of both sender and receiver of communication reflects in the effective communication. For example, a worried person cannot communicate properly, and an angry receiver cannot understand the real meaning of message. Miscommunication may occur because of premature evaluation by receiver, due to preconceived notions or prejudices against the communication. The receiver is not paying attention towards the message. The loss of transmission and poor retention of information on the part of the receiver, and distrust between sender and receiver. Organizational barriers. Communication in an organization may be hampered if an organizational policy is not supportive to free flow of communication due to rigid rules and cumbersome procedures in an organization, due to psychological distance between a superior and his subordinates if the organizational structure is complex, due to the lack of facilities like frequent meetings, suggestion box, complaint box, social and cultural gathering, transparency in operations, etc. Personal barriers. Effective communication in an organization may also be influenced by the personal factors of both sender and receiver. Communication in an organization may be hampered due to various reasons. 1. If a superior perceives that a particular communication may adversely affect his authority. 2. If a superior does not have confidence on the competency of their subordinates. 3. If subordinates are not prepared to communicate with their superiors as it may adversely affect their interests. And finally, 4. If there is no motivation or incentive for communication, subordinates may not take initiative to communicate. Communication may also be affected by noise. Physical distractions such as poor lighting, uncomfortable sitting, unhygienic room also affects communication in a meeting. Ways to overcome barriers to communication. To attain organizational goals, it is essential for a manager to deal and cope up with these communication barriers. Managers should take appropriate measures to overcome these barriers and promote effective communication in an organization. There are a few pointers to be kept in mind to overcome barriers to communication. A manager should be very clear in what he wants to communicate to his subordinates. The message to be conveyed should be in clear and simple language. To avoid misunderstanding, a manager should adjust his level of communication as per the education and understanding levels of his subordinates. A manager should involve his subordinates in developing a plan for communication. This may help the manager to gain ready acceptance and willing cooperation of subordinates. A manager should use proper contents, tone, Language while framing a message. The message should be understandable to the receiver and should not offend the sentiments of the receivers. He should also select the medium of communication properly. Simple messages should be conveyed orally, while complex messages should be delivered in writing. A manager should convey a message according to the interests and needs of his subordinates to evoke response from the same. A manager may ask for the feedback from his subordinates to ensure whether his or her message is understood or not in the same terms as intended by him. In order to maintain consistency, a manager should communicate to meet the existing commitments while aiming at future goals of the organization. There should be regular follow-up and review on the instructions given to subordinates. This will help in removing hurdles in the implementation of the instructions. A manager should be a good listener. He should spend quality time with his subordinates and should listen to their problems and feedbacks actively. For an effective communication, it is essential for a manager to identify the source of noise and then eliminate the same. A manager should use proper body language during communication. He should not show his emotions while communicating, as the receiver might misinterpret the message being delivered. There should be a simple organizational structure with optimum number of hierarchical levels. Simpler the organizational structure, more effective will be the communication. On the whole, we can say that communication is the life source of organizations because organizations involve people. People cannot interact with each other without communication. In the absence of communication, everything would grind to a halt. For example, the workers in an organization would not know the organization's objectives, their roles and responsibilities. The managers would not be able to train their workers, etc. The basic functions of management, planning, organizing, staffing, directing and controlling cannot be performed well without effective communication. In organizations, both formal and informal communication simultaneously takes place. Along with formal communication, a manager should learn to manage with informal communication also. Managers should take appropriate measures to overcome the barriers of communication and promote effective communication in the organization.